Here's a take that's going to surprise you. The first round of the 2026 NFL Draft should not be quarterback or bust for the New York Jets. We'll dive into it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, October 29th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, on today's show, we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. And unsurprisingly, a lot of the questions are looking ahead to the offseason with the Jets heading into their bye at 1-7. We're going to talk about a dilemma the Jets face at the guard position looking forward. We'll talk about the future of Breece Hall, which is very much up in the air. And we'll talk about what the Jets should do at the quarterback position in the 2026 NFL Draft. That's actually where we will begin. Our first question, John, Todd McShay speculated that all the quarterbacks we are talking about will stay in school this year. It's really not that far-fetched given how much money these kids are making in college. If the Jets are not in a position to draft a quarterback high next year, what should they do? Would you be okay running it back with Fields and replacing Tyrod Taylor with someone like Gardner Minshew, who is younger and more durable? Would you call San Francisco to try and swing a trade for Mac Jones? None of the options seem great. I have many thoughts on this. My first thought is that most of these quarterbacks are probably going to enter the NFL draft. I don't think we're to the point yet where the finances in college make it a better move to stay in school an extra year. I think that there's a lot of risk if you go back to school, because if you're someone who was going to be a first round pick this year and you stay in school and you have a bad year and your stock drops, you're costing yourself millions of dollars. The other, and this is a key thing to remember, is the longer you wait to get into the NFL, the more you delay the second contract you receive. And the second contract is really the big money that you make. You know, the first contract's good money if you're taken high, but you're still on the rookie wage scale, which limits your salary. The second contract is really the contract that sets you up for life. And even if you're getting paid in college, it's probably not worth it to delay the second contract by a year, because you only get the second contract after 4 NFL seasons. So staying in college next year means you have to wait 1 year longer to get that second contract. So I think that the quarterbacks who are at the top of this year's class are going to enter the draft. I have a controversial take, though. I'm not convinced at all that the Jets should draft a quarterback in the first round this year. And I know what your first question is. And the answer to that is yes, I have seen the Jets quarterback play this year. I know the answer to your second question. Yes, I understand how important the quarterback position is in the NFL. And the answer to your third question is yes, I know the Jets do need to get a long-term quarterback. But I think we're looking at this all wrong, because I think that the general view in the NFL is that drafting a quarterback high in the first round is some sort of cheat code that takes you from being a bad team to a good team. And the truth is more complicated than that. I think we look at the outlier cases, like a Drake May, who's changing the franchise in New England, or, Daniels in Washington, who in 1 year took them from the bottom of the league to the NFC Championship game. And we think that that's the normal case. The reality is that more frequently, you're taking a player with talent who can succeed in the right position, but who will not succeed if he's not in the right position. And if you are not a team that is currently in a position to develop a quarterback, you're better off not taking him, because you do more damage. And we've seen this over and over with the Jets when they drafted Sam Darnold, when they were not a team that was built to develop a quarterback. To an extent, the same was true with Zach Wilson. It was definitely true when they drafted Geno Smith. Quarterbacks, most of them need some degree of nurturing. It's great if you get the franchise-changing passer, but most of these guys are not. Most of these guys are players who have ability if you can develop them properly. The Athletic did a great article on this recently. They talked about all the way teams mess up quarterbacks. And You see the same mistakes over and over. We've seen the same mistakes with the Jets over and over. Instead of understanding that the onus is on the team to get the quarterback to maximize his potential, the team essentially just thinks, well, we drafted the quarterback. Now it's all on him. Now the quarterback's job is to carry us to glory. And that's simply not how it works in most cases. And, if you want an example, well, let's look at the quarterbacks who have been drafted number one recently. So you have Joe Burrow back in 2020, who was the legitimate franchise changer. Who are the quarterbacks who have gone number one since him? Well, Trevor Lawrence, who was supposed to be the franchise changer. You've got Bryce Young, who's, very, very up and down. You've got Caleb Williams, who's not as good as the two guys, at least at this point, who were drafted immediately after him. And this year you've got Cam Ward, who's struggling in a dysfunctional Texans franchise. It's not that easy. And all of those guys have a chance to, be good players in this league. But it shows that, just getting a high draft pick and using it on a quarterback is not the thing that automatically turns your franchise around. You have to surround the quarterback with the right pieces. And we've seen this here in New York, where there are two guys who played in the city, one of whom played for the Jets, the other of whom played for the Giants, who are playing great this year after failing with their initial team because their initial team did not do a good job developing them. Those are Sam Darnold, former Jet in Seattle, and Daniel Jones, former Giant in Indianapolis. Both of them having great years, both of them leaving New York organizations that were dysfunctional. Both of them were viewed as failures when they left these organizations, but the organizations really were not set up to help them succeed. They go to new organizations that are, and suddenly they're playing really good football. So I think the question is, are you set up right now to develop a quarterback? I think the answer to that's unclear. There is a lot that's unbuilt on this offense. You've got a good number one receiver in Garrett Wilson. We'll talk a little bit about Breece Hall going forward. It's not clear Breece is going to be here. And then after that, the skill positions, we don't really know. I mean, Mason Taylor's showing some promise. Isaiah Davis is showing some promise. Maybe Braylon Allen's got some talent, but there's not a lot that we can be sure about beyond Garrett Wilson. And the offensive line, well, we've drafted tackles number one back-to-back year, so that's good. But there are some other question marks. We're going to get to them in a little bit. Coaching, it's amazing to me that Tanner Engstrand gets as much praise as he does, given the state of the offense. And I know, I know Justin Fields has been an issue on offense, but I can't remember an offensive coordinator with the Jets who's been able to use bad quarterback plays as an excuse. And I think I've seen things with Engstrand on a week-to-week basis that really have left me scratching my head, whether it's the game against Denver where Breece Hall is not getting a target, whether it's the game against Carolina where they abandoned the run in the second half. Even the Cincinnati game, there were some situational play calls that I thought were very odd. I did not like the way the Jets came out in that game, super conservative instead of letting Fields throw the ball. I think at this point, it's not known whether Engstrand is a good bet to develop a young quarterback. And we'll see. Look, there is still half a season to play. My tune could be very different by the end of the year, depending on how the end of the 2025 season plays out. But I worry the Jets are too chaotic of an organization to develop a quarterback right now. And, part of this deals with what happened the last couple of days, where do I want to bring a young quarterback into a franchise where the owner's liable to go out and publicly bash him when he doesn't play well? I think that's, if you're the GM or head coach of this team, I think that's got to be a consideration. Now, the thing is, it's not easy to find a good quarterback, but we've seen over and over, whether it's Baker Mayfield with Tampa Bay, whether it's Darnold in Seattle, whether it's Jones in Indianapolis. I mean, you have to remember, Jared Goff was kind of viewed as a salary dump when the Lions traded for him in the Matthew Stafford trade. If you find one of those quarterbacks who we talked about, who has ability but was not in the right spot early in his career, sometimes you can turn it around. It seems like the Jets have kind of struck out on Justin Fields, what happened Sunday notwithstanding. I think that's probably the direction you look to again. At least that's the direction I would look at again right now. Things could change by the end of the year. Now, maybe the Jets by the end of the season are looking like a team that's making progress. Maybe the Jets are looking like a team that is in position to develop a quarterback. Maybe Engstrand is starting to show growth as a coordinator. But I think right now there's too much unsettled for me to feel comfortable about the Jets drafting a quarterback in the first round. And I know that's a controversial take, but I think sometimes in the NFL, we take certain team building principles for granted without actually testing them out. And when you actually test them out, they don't really hold up. And one of them is that you have to draft a quarterback in the first round when you need a quarterback. I think it's much more true that you should only draft a quarterback in the first round when you're ready to develop the quarterback. I'm not sure whether the Jets are ready to develop the quarterback right now. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about a player who could be a key component of developing a quarterback, Breece Hall. The Jets' future is very much up in the air. In fact, he may have played his last game with the Jets for all we know, or he could be a Jet for a long time. There's a lot to decipher with what's going on with Breece Hall, and we'll try and break it all down as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. And Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel the craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. And with all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda. Move and be moved. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by Game Time. The NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being at MetLife Stadium or on the road surrounded by the fans cheering on the Jets. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it's frustrating. And that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. I've used Game Time myself. I used it a couple weeks ago to go see the Jets play the Broncos in London, but I've also used Game Time for other things. I've used it to go see U.S. Open tennis. I've used it to go see a couple shows on Broadway through the years. Every single time I've gotten a great deal, and it's been simple. And again, there's no hidden fees. What you see is what you pay. I really like that. No surprises when you check out. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question: does Sunday's game change one's decision to trade Breece Hall? What is the hope versus the actual performance of Breece Hall through the years and going forward? And that's a great question. I've kind of been a fence sitter on Breece Hall, and normally I'm not a big fence sitter. But I've gone back and forth on what the Jets should do with Breece. I mean, it feels like week by week I'm changing my mind, but I've kind of settled on the idea that the Jets should try and keep Breece Hall long term. And I say that for a couple of reasons. The primary reason is the Jets. It's a very simple principle. The Jets need to add more good players, not subtract the good players that they do have. I mean, I see all this speculation about guys who are going to be traded. I do think guys who are not going to be here next year, who are in the final year of their contract, should be traded because you want to get something in return for them rather than let them leave for no compensation. But I look at the expected returns for some of these guys. I've seen speculation. Quinnen Williams, a first-round pick, Jermaine Johnson, a second-round pick, Will McDonald, a third-round pick, and I say it's better to try and work things out with these guys, better to try and win with these guys, because trading them, you get a draft pick, but you're also creating a hole. And I'm a big believer in building through the draft. I think teams should be looking to add more draft picks, but I also don't think you do that through getting rid of your established players, because when you get rid of your established players, it's unlikely you're going to be able to replace them with a pick that's better than them. Every player has a price. If some team offers, 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick for Quinnen Williams, then it's a different story. But generally speaking, I think the players who have had success on this team are players the Jets should look to keep and build around. And if they're not playing well, the Jets should try and help them work through their slumps. And I think, you saw how important Breece can be in that Sunday win over the Cincinnati Bengals. He's part of the question is, how much does he want? And that's something we don't really know at this point. And I think that obviously could play a role in whether you want to keep him or not, because I think we need to come to grips with the notion that Breece Hall is not an elite back. And this kind of leads us into the second part of the question, which was what's the hope versus the actual performance of Breece Hall through the years and going forward. When the Jets drafted Breece Hall, the hope was that he'd be like a Jonathan Taylor kind of guy, a guy who could just lift an offense on his back, one of those few backs who could be the focal point of a good offense. I think we've seen that that's not who Breece is. And I do think the Jets have kind of miscast Breece as an every down back, a guy who's never comes off the field. I think it's clear, at least it is to me, that Breece Hall would be better off in a situation where he's part of a tandem. And, I felt like in many ways, Braylon Allen was a good compliment for Breece because the stuff Breece does well complements the stuff Braylon does really well. Isaiah Davis could also be, a compliment to Breece. What does Breece do well? He's explosive when he gets the ball in space. It's a very small distinction, but people say Breece Hall's a great receiving back. I don't know that he's a great receiving back. I think like Alvin Kamara is a great receiving back. I think Christian McCaffrey is a great receiving back. These are guys you can stick in the slot and they will toast linebackers in coverage because they're such great route runners. I don't think Breece is like a great route runner. Look, you watch the film, there's flashes of really good route running. You can see a play here or there where he really looks good as a route runner. But I think Breece's production as a receiver is more just a function of how explosive he is in space. You get him the ball on a check down on a screen, and he's got space in front of him, he can make a big play. And that's just true in general. And I think like what the Jets need to look to do is get him going on outside runs. And one of the things we've discussed frequently on this show over the last couple of months is that, Breece is not a guy who reads blocks great. And this is you want to talk complaints about Tanner Engstrand. Tanner Engstrand's running him on almost nothing but zone runs. And on zone runs, the running back has to make pretty complex reads compared with runs like man or gap or duo. And it's just not in Breece's wheelhouse. And even so, he's still producing at a pretty good rate. So I think you keep him. I think you acknowledge that, he's a good back. He's not a great back. He's probably not a guy who can carry an offense at this point in his career. But he has things he brings to the table. He adds that home run threat. And, when you run him inside, run him on man runs, run him on duo runs, run him on gap runs, do those things instead of the constant zone runs, which require him to, read and time blocks at a higher level. That's where I am with Breece right now. And I think he should be a part of the team going forward. I hope he is a part of the team going forward. Trade deadline's coming up, and the Jets trying to buy this week. So it's not out of the realm of possibility Breece Hall gets traded before the next game the Jets play. But I'm hoping he stays around for a longer time. I think that he's a guy worth a second contract. I have kind of evolved on the idea of giving a running back a second contract. I used to be super opposed to it. I think recent history has shown us that running backs on second contracts are not necessarily the terrible investment that they've been made out to be. Part of it depends on Breece willing to agree to a fair deal to the Jets, but I'm inclined to want to see Breece Hall stay with this team. Our next question, John, it's that time of year again. Do the Jets root for the tank and better draft position, or do you want to see wins going forward? This is the debate that's really very subjective. Every fan views this differently. Through the years, I think there have been years where it's been better off for the Jets to lose games, and there have been years where it's been better off for the Jets to win games. And I think a lot of that's a question of, are you building something for the future? A year ago, the Jets are winning games in December, but it didn't really make a difference because the team was really old. You knew most of those guys weren't coming back. You weren't building on anything. This year's Jets team's the opposite. It's a super young team. Any given week, you have between 9 and 11 first or second year players seeing significant snaps. It's all about the future right now for the New York Jets. And I think there are a couple things that come into play. And this is one thing I talk about a lot on this show, but people overestimate the difference between drafting first and drafting, say, fifth, or they overestimate the difference between like picks 3 and pick 6. It's better to have the high pick. The actual gain typically is not that great. It's pretty marginal. And often what happens is, the 6th pick is better than the 3rd pick. The 5th pick is better than the 1st pick. That happens more often than you realize. It's not as big of a deal to pick a few spots lower as people make it out to be. And beyond that, well, you know what? I think this is a team that if the Jets are winning games, it's a sign that the young players are coming together. It's a sign that Aaron Glenn and his coaching staff are showing signs that they know what they're doing. And that's a good thing. And I'd much rather the Jets finish this season strong than end up with the number one pick, because you end up with the number one pick, you're going to be in that chaotic situation I described in the first segment, where you're a team that probably is not in a position to develop a quarterback. And you look at the great quarterbacks across the league. Mahomes wasn't the number one pick. Lamar wasn't the number one pick. Allen wasn't the number one pick. Jalen Hurts was a second round pick. Jordan Love was drafted at the end of the first round. I mean, there are lots of good quarterbacks who don't go at the very top of the draft. So it's not like the Jets can't get a quarterback if they're picking lower than pick 1 or pick 2 or pick 3. There are good quarterbacks available later in the first round if you're a team that knows how to develop a quarterback, if you're a franchise that has stability. And the Jets winning games would show a sign that for the first time in a while, maybe they're on their way to becoming one of those franchises. So for me, there's no question. Jets are much better off winning games than losing for draft position. That, to me, this is not a year where I think it's super debatable. I think there are years where it's debatable. I don't know that this one is. I think first-year coach, first-year GM, young team, they win games. It's a good sign. It's a sign that things are coming together for these guys and that they know what they're doing. And that's worth far more value than a couple slots in the draft. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're not done looking to the future. Jets have some big decisions to make, and a problem that's kind of flying under the radar. They're going to need a couple of replacement offensive linemen next year. Let's discuss what their options are as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets.
I'm Cody Rourke from Locked On Broncos, and this episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. This is Peloton's most advanced equipment yet, giving you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or you're cross-training with your favorite instructors like Alex Toussaint. It's training reimagined to make your workout more personal. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with features that help you plan, stay motivated, and hit peak performance. You can let yourself run, lift, flex, and go, while Peloton handles all the rest. Plus, Peloton IQ provides real-time strength coaching, tracking your progress and suggesting weights that challenge you so you can get stronger. Plus, the new movement tracking camera, it counts your reps and corrects your form in real time, making sure every rep is safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Wednesday, we are doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question comes from Drew, who writes, John, what are your thoughts on the play of the offensive line this year? Are they giving up sacks and pressures because Fields holds the ball too long, or are they just getting beat? Do you think Simpson's play is throwing off Fashanu? Finally, should we re-sign AVT? He's a good player, but the guy is always hurt. So Drew is really focused on the offensive line. So let's go. He had a lot of questions. Let's go through them one by one. Are they giving up sacks and pressures because Fields holds the ball too long, or because they're getting beaten? It's a little of both. I would lean more towards Fields being the issue, though. I mean, especially in the Denver and Carolina games. I mean, Fields is just taking some really terrible sacks. I think the offensive line is playing a little bit below expectations this year. But, I think the quarterback holding the ball for too long is clearly an issue. And, you look at the two games where they've really kept Fields clean recently. There's the Miami game and the Cincinnati game. Those were really bad pass rushes they faced. I mean, Cincinnati's only real pass rusher is Trey Hendrickson, and he was clearly playing hurt. He was clearly a shell of himself. And Miami's just not a great pass rush. And the Jets offensive line dominated those teams. And that's a really good sign. That's a sign that this offensive line has real potential. I think a lot of the issues Fields, I'm not saying the offensive line's been great, but I think you have to look into the quarterback to explain a lot of their bad play. Do you think Simpson's play is throwing off Fashanu? That's an interesting question. I was not a big fan. I know a lot of people wanted to extend Simpson before the season. I kind of agreed with that at first, but the more I thought of it, the less I agreed with it. And the reason for that is I was worried that maybe Simpson's 2024 season was a bit of a mirage, because it was really the best season of his career. It was the first good season, and that could mean one of two good things. It could mean that the player's on an upward trajectory. It could mean that the Jets were a better fit for him than Baltimore or the Raiders were. But it also could just mean it was a mirage. And I was a little worried about that. And unfortunately, I think if you're looking for the weak link on the offensive line so far this year, it has been John Simpson. He's been having a rough season. he's particularly struggled in blitz pickups. I mean, that it's clear that defenses are blitzing the left side of the Jets offensive line. It's clear part of the reason is Simpson's having a tough time recognizing it. I don't know how much I put of Simpson. I don't know how much I put Simpson's struggles as an explanation for Fashanu being inconsistent. Look, here's where I think Olu Fashanu is right now. I think he's a below average starting left tackle, but he's not a disaster. And that actually has quite a bit of value because a guy who's a below average starting left tackle is somebody who can help you have a functional offense. I say this a lot, and I think at the left tackle position, it's one of those spots where the actual gap and the impact it has on your team is far lower if you go from like the best left tackle to a mediocre left tackle than it is going from mediocre left tackle to a guy who's a traffic cone. I think, a mediocre left tackle, a guy who's a little below average like Olu Fashanu is right now, you can keep an offense afloat with that. You have a guy who can't play tackle, your offense cannot function. So even having a guy like Fashanu, even if he's a little below average at the left tackle spot, left tackle is one of those spots where even having a starter who's a little below average still is valuable to you because you'll face teams like Miami and Cincinnati where they don't have good pass rushers, and he'll dominate, and your offense will look really good. And the other thing with Fashanu is he's still young in his career. Offensive line, particularly the tackle spot, is a place where there is a longer growth curve than typical in the NFL. There's a longer growth curve at the tackle spot than there is in almost any other position in this league. So there's still some runway for Olu Fashanu to improve. He's a functional player right now. He can get better. How much do I put on Simpson? I don't know. I think there have been moments where Olu's kind of struggled one-on-one with his blocks, and that's got to get better. I mean, I don't know that he's got the greatest play strength in the league, but there's hope for improvement with Olu. Simpson, I don't know. Simpson's a tough call. I don't know that I'd bring him back after the season he's having. And, perhaps it could improve the left tackle spot a little bit if you're getting better play from left guard. And then the last question, should we re-sign AVT? This is going to be controversial. I would try and do it. I'd try and do it I wouldn't give him a big money deal. It would be an incentive-laden deal. It would be based on playing time. But it's not just that he's a good player when he's on the field, which is a critical component to this. It's also like, and I know I've said this a bunch and he keeps getting hurt again, but the injuries he's suffered are not like chronic conditions. It was one thing when Mekhi Becton, suffered serious injuries to the same knee in back-to-back seasons. None of these AVT injuries are the types of thing that should prevent him from having a long and productive career. And it's not like these are chronic conditions. These are kind of like one-off things. It's, medical science, we don't know what the future holds, but all the data we have right now suggests that these are not going to be things that are necessarily more likely he's going to re-injure in the future. So I know it's tough to say right now when the guy's missed almost 3 of his 5 seasons in the league with injuries, but I wouldn't be surprised if some team, whether it's the Jets or someone else, signs AVT to a discount deal and ends up getting a great bargain. Because I just, it's not like he's suffering these injuries that are chronic things that'll harm him the rest of his career. I think that there's a chance he ends up becoming a guy who stays pretty healthy going forward. And our last question, with the lack of depth at wide receiver, what is the possibility of playing Mason Taylor at wide receiver and regularly subbing in an extra offensive lineman to cover tight end blocking duty? Would there be a benefit? I think you're actually seeing this a little bit. The Jets have a package where they put Max Mitchell on the field as like an extra blocker. But to the bigger point of the question, Mason Taylor actually kind of does a lot of wide receiver things right now anyway. That's kind of the modern NFL where your tight end's kind of like an extra wide receiver. And I think that like if we were starting from scratch today, let's just imagine like there were no position designations and we were put in charge of like figuring out how we define positions. I don't think we would separate wide receiver and tight end the way it is now in the NFL. I think the distinction from between wide receiver and tight end is something from decades ago. They used to be 2 very different positions, but as the league has evolved, tight ends now essentially for all intents and purposes, they're wide receivers who block. So you'll see Taylor in the slot. You'll see Taylor out wide. He's still going to be, even though he's listed as a tight end, he's still going to be used quite a bit in the passing game. So I don't think that like there needs to be, I don't think it's really as dramatic of a move is, say like Mason Taylor's going to be used as a wide receiver, as you might think by the fact he's listed as a tight end. I think he's kind of used as a wide receiver anyway. And, you hope that going forward, he continues to show some growth and he continues to become a big part of this passing offense. But yeah, I think they're kind of doing that anyway. I think that's kind of the way the modern NFL works, where your tight end is essentially an extra wide receiver. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.